Hey, everybody, welcome to Leaders Lead. This week we have John Myers. John, what an absolute honor to have you here today. And welcome back to the United States,
Thank
man.
you. Thank you. Been back since July 25th. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's super cool. John, first and foremost, before we get going into this, for people who don't know you and haven't had a chance to, A, follow you on any of the social media channels, or B, read your sweet book. And we'll talk about that later on. Can you give us a little bit about your background and what you've been doing
Sure. Yeah.
and what you have done?
Sure. Absolutely. So I'm a Virginian, a 14th generation Virginian, and grew up in Virginia.
14th?
14th generation. Yeah. So 1609, Jamestown is my first ancestor. So since the beginning, the first people landed in 1608. So since the beginning. But yeah, I live in Virginia now. I've lived in the same property for about 25 years. But I grew up in Virginia Beach, and at the age of 10, was fortunate enough to travel overseas. My parents became CIA operatives. I had a stepfather. I grew up, in an abusive household, but luckily a stepfather came along who was kind of my savior, and he was a Marine, a former Marine. So he really shaped my decision, and they became CIA operatives, and we lived overseas in the Philippines and Greece and Italy and Mexico City, and I was dead set on becoming a Marine, which I did do. I went to George Washington University, became a Marine, where I served for 28 years as an intelligence officer. When I retired in 2020, I was General Milley's Director of Regional Intelligence, and did a lot of high-profile stuff in the Marine Corps. As I wrote in my book, a lot of my fellow Marine Corps officers like to call me the Forrest Gump of Marine Corps officers, because I just sort of fell backwards, happenstance, into like a lot of the most high profile things we did. The rescue of Captain Scott O'Grady from Bosnia, which was turned into a movie, Behind Enemy Lines, which Scott O'Grady is not a big fan of that movie, by the way. But and then I went to Iraq, of course, as all Marines who were in uniform at the time did, Iraq or Afghanistan. So I was there for the invasion of Iraq, and in the same spaces as General Mattis, watching that all unfold. And then later in my career, I was for those familiar with the attacks in Benghazi, which is a big hot button issue, of course. There's always been this rumor of a force of Marines that were there in the area, which could have gone in to Libya during the times of the attacks, but they were told to stand down. And I was that Marine who was told to stand down by Hillary Clinton in the State Department. I had a force of Marines there that we were preparing to send in. I had a very nice plan, but we were told it would send the wrong message. So obviously, I didn't agree with that. And then, but I had to press on. I still had several years in the Marine Corps. I led the Edward Snowden investigation for the Marine Corps to sort of determine what he stole from us and what damage it caused, and then how we were going to mitigate that damage. And then finally, went to worked around Africa, countering the Russians and the Chinese across the continent of Africa, 37 different countries, as well as Scandinavia, where I was writing plans to counter the Russians along with the Norwegians, and finally retired off of the Joint Staff. And then how you and I came together via other friends, etc., was my involvement in the evacuation of Afghanistan, which was after my retirement, but as a just volunteer, self-driven thing with some other former Marines, and we had 6,000 people at one point on our manifests, and we got several hundred Americans out, and that's how I came to know you, was through our interactions during that
Yeah.
process. And that's sort of my whole life story in a very long nutshell.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? I don't even know that Forrest Gump holds a stick to the things that you've done. And that movie is we're going to call it B-roll film compared to what you've experienced. So, uh, I mean, honestly, first and foremost, we want to say on behalf of everyone that's going to listen to this podcast, myself and this great nation, Jonathan, we want to say Thank you for your service. We appreciate you. We appreciate what you've done to help build plans to protect this nation, the selflessness that you've demonstrated. Um, just, dude, it's an honor, absolute honor to be connected with you. It's an honor to do what little I've done with you and what we're going to continue to do in the future. So, looking forward to it.
Thank you very
Um, you
much.
know, I think, yeah, you're welcome. I think you're missing a little bit of that story though before we get into the questions. What else you got going on? You got a beautiful wife, some
Oh
kids.
yeah.
Let's talk about that.
Okay. Yeah. Well, my wife is a senior defense civilian in the intelligence business. We recently finished a 3-year tour in Germany on her orders, and I was retired, expecting to, have a life of travel and leisure with my years after leaving the Marine Corps. But we got there exactly 2 weeks after COVID started. So, and Germany was the worst place in the world to be during COVID. So we were locked up pretty tight. So by the end of the 3 years,
Yeah.
we were ready to come back, actually. And, I have 3 kids. We live on a small farm in Virginia, but my girls are away at college now, twin daughters at different colleges in Virginia. I have a son who's in high school that still lives here with us. And yeah, I'm currently a candidate for Congress in Virginia for the 7th District as a Republican. And, so I'm deeply engaged in that. That's what I do 24 hours a day. And, that's where we're at right now. That's our life.
Yeah, man. And I think you have a dog too,
We do have
right?
a dog,
One
a
dog?
Weimaraner. Yeah,
Y-
which
Yeah,
I'd say
a Weimaraner.
don't ever get a Weimaraner.
Super high
Oh my God,
energy.
it's ridiculous.
Super high energy. Man, that's cool. Um, Great family, great guy. It just goes a testament of your life of service, right? And your dedication to this great nation of the selflessness of keep wanting to serve. So kudos to you, man.
Thank you.
Um, hey, yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to ask you a question about a little bit about your background. I got it written down over here for me, so I don't forget it, and I try to get it concise. So if you see me looking over
Yeah.
here,
Okay.
I don't know if I'm pointing the right way on the podcast either, because sometimes it comes backwards. So we'll figure that out. Um, but so it's a little bit about cultural shaping. You grew up in a super diverse culture with your parents, being CIA operatives, which, by the way, is just ridiculous. Um, that's crazy. And what specific cultural perspectives did that bring to you, and the value that you found in that, um, that were challenging to you from your own upbringing? And then how did that help shape you? Right? Because you lived kind of like this secretive life that your parents had, and you were in all these different places. Like, can you talk about that a little
Yeah,
bit?
sure. So I grew up in Virginia Beach, and for the first 10 years of my life, I'd never left the country. Possibly, I'd never left the state, and grew up pretty poor, and as I told you, in kind of an abusive situation. And then this gentleman comes along who was very squared away, had been a Marine, and joined the CIA, and then my mother joined as well, and we were whisked away to the Philippines, and so uh, I thought I was poor, and then I got to the Philippines, and it, having that kind of cultural experience and exposure to real poverty kind of wakes you up.
Yeah.
When you get insulated in the United States and you don't really know what's going on in the rest of the world, you get an idea of what constitutes poverty, or living in a bad situation, and then you go see how some other people live, and it kind of wakes you up, and you're like, it's actually, the United States is not that bad. Not that I thought it was bad, but you start to realize that you had it pretty good. But yeah, so it was a very secretive life. In fact, as I wrote in my book, I didn't even know my parents were CIA operatives the whole time, from when we left the country when I was 10 until I turned 17, I think, because at that point, the CIA employees who were working in covered position, which means you have a cover story, people don't know who you work for, and everything's made up, just like in the movies. They
Hmm.
if they have children, they are given the choice to either tell their children that they work as CIA operatives, or never tell them. And my stepfather chose to tell me, so it was kind of an interesting story how in Italy we got on a bus, which we never did together. So it was kind of unusual that he asked me to go somewhere on the bus, and then we got off that bus and we got on another bus, and 3 or 4 times transferred to different buses until we were on the other side of Rome. And then, he told me at some random bus stop in a strange neighborhood, he's like, the reason I brought you out here wasn't because I wanted to take you somewhere. It's because I need to tell you something. And that's when he broke the news to me, that here's what your mother and I really do. We're covered CIA operatives. And so everything you thought you knew about what was going on in your life and our lives and my work, and it was all not true. So it was, it was quite a interesting event that happened. But yeah, so back to the cultural thing, getting exposure. So we lived in the Philippines, we lived in Athens, Greece, we lived in Rome, Italy, which is where I went to high school, and then Mexico City as well. And so that's the whole spectrum of cultures. You have the Asian culture, we had the Greek, which is pseudo Middle East, pseudo European. We had the European
Hmm.
culture. We had the Latin American culture, and it just really creates a much more rounded person, especially when you get exposed to it when you're young, like I did. And so, I went into intelligence in the Marine Corps, and it formed the basis for sort of my knowledge base. I wasn't a corn-fed guy from Kansas who had to learn how to be an intel officer. It was kind of just a natural fit. It shaped who I
Hmm.
was as a Marine, because I could sort of speak from experience, which a lot of the Marine Corps intel officers around me couldn't do. Um, so yeah, it was a very formative experience, both having the parents have a secret life as spies that I didn't know about until later, and
Unbelievable.
then looking back, you could kind of put some pieces together, and say, oh, that explains why people were targeting our house. Or, in fact, I don't know if I put this in my book, but the maybe I did. But at the embassy in Rome, the Italian terrorist organization at the time, I think it was called the Red Army, or I'm sorry, it's escaping me right now. Red Brigades, maybe something like that. They
Okay.
had set up an automatic rocket launcher in a hotel across the street, across the Via Veneto, aimed at the embassy, and it was aimed at the back of my mother's head. So, because she sat in front of the window in the agency office spaces, and these Red Brigades people somehow had intel and they knew which office they were targeting, and it happened to be aimed directly at her head, and it didn't go off. So the Carabinieri, the Italian police, got some intel, and they went up there and raided the room, and the rocket launcher was just set up on a timer, but it never went off. So, that's one very interesting story. And then also, my mother was a case officer, and one of her cases was. Um, so I know this isn't directly related to your cultural question, but what
No,
case
that's
officers
just
do,
amazing story to
what
share.
case officers do is they convince people to be spies, from on their own country, or double agents or something. So like a case officer for Russia would work with Russians to develop them as assets for the United States. And that's sort of what my mother did. And she was a Russian case officer. And when Aldrich Ames, who was a famous turncoat American, was working with the Russians, he exposed a lot of those double agents. And
Yeah.
that had a big impact on my mother because she had recruited some of those people or developed those people. And of course, they disappeared, after Ames sold them out. So that was one of the reasons
Yeah.
she didn't stay in that career track for a very long time. She switched career tracks because that can have a pretty
Yeah.
devastating impact.
Yeah. There's um, a lot of that. When you think about those cultural experiences and the the impact that it has on you of like having to be adaptable, right? To all of these different elements, to fit into all these different cultural, I'll call it norms that you don't know anything about. How do you think that benefited you throughout your career?
Oh, it's immensely benefited me. So the latter part of my career, I became a I was kind of like the Africa expert, Africa intel expert, and I would go down there and plan amphibious operations with African partners. 37 countries all around. I was going to Africa basically all the time, and working in areas where there were no kidding Chinese soldiers working, and we would see them. But I had grown up sort of in this environment of being, I call it being in my little box, like my American box. So you could
Yeah.
stick me in the worst conditions in Africa, and I would be able to just sort of say, well, this is my space, you know, around me, and I'm comfortable, even though we're in the worst conditions, because I was used to being in strange cultures and different conditions. So as an older Marine Corps officer,
Yeah.
they would send me to Africa all the time, and I would just immediately be able to focus on the mission because I wasn't concerned about, oh, it's hot here, or oh, I don't, the food is weird, or oh, this hotel is not like an American hotel, or we're sleeping in this jungle that doesn't look like the woods I'm used to. I mean, I'd seen
Yeah.
all this stuff. This, as a Marine Corps officer, this was didn't phase me at all. You know, it definitely
Yeah.
shaped. And then later, when I went to the Joint Staff, I went as the Africa intel guy for General Dunford, who was the chairman, and then he left, and I sort of inherited Millie and was moved up to being in charge of analysts who were in charge of mini regions. Um, my cultural experience, you know, probably made me one of the few people in the world suited to take that job at that time, and I think that's one of the reasons I was recruited to do that was my Africa experience and my worldwide cultural experience, because I could work with any of the regional analysts and know immediately what they're talking about, the different cultural aspects of, like males Middle Eastern males between the ages of 18 and 35, mams, military age males in the Middle East. You know, that was not a foreign thing to me that I had to learn. I understood it, having grown up, around that kind of environment.
Yeah. Man, what a bunch of amazing stories, and I I hope that the people that are watching this and the people that are getting introduced to you are just like earning for more, and they're like, oh my god, I can't wait to pick up, I can't wait to pick up American to the Corpse.
Sure.
I can't wait to go see it. I can't wait to go buy it. Guess what? It's rad. News alert. It's rad. Um, hey, what can we do? Like, what can this community do? I'm actually starting to gain some traction, which is kind of like you're my fifth guest,
Nice.
and I'm super excited about it. And there's the community started to latch onto this. What can this community do as we continue to gain more steam and people start to come and hear these leadership lessons um, from people that have walked the paths like yourself? What can we do to lift you up and support you?
Just people just need to support veterans and understand that they have very unique circumstances and unique experiences, and to, more than just saying thank you for your service. Everybody says that to everybody, which is always appreciated. But like to really sit down and glean experiences from veterans, because they have so many, and a lot of people feel like they've done their duty when they say thank you for your service, and the veteran says thank you for your recognition, and you go on your way. But if you really sit down and talk, and not, it's been this big movement later to talk to like World War II vets, and because they're dying so fast, to try and get their experiences and glean life lessons from that and sort of record that for future generations. But there's a whole generation of people your age and my age and younger that
Yep.
nobody really digs down into the experiences they have, which are very similar. And it's so easy to do because they're all around. So just talking to a vet, and it's very important these days because one of my, not pet issues that makes it sound trivial, but one of my issues is veteran suicide. You know, I work with my friend Matt Wiz Buckley, who runs No Fallen Heroes, and they're experimenting with some alternative therapies that they've used with the Luttrell brothers, the one who is the basis of the Lone Survivor movie, as well as the one who's in Congress. And they've gone down
Yeah,
and done,
I was just reading about
yeah,
that.
they've gone down and done some treatments, and so veteran suicide is it's an epidemic. I mean, it's not just something I talk about. I mean, I've had several, many experiences up until most recent one, probably 3 or 4 months ago, with my friends committing suicide. Including one guy used to come out here with his son to my place and spend time on my property and paint fence and bond with his son with 5 children, and committed suicide, about a year and a half ago. But yeah, so just reaching out to veterans and talking to them and, gathering intel, as I call it, from their experiences.
Yeah, it's real.
Oh, yeah.
Um, it's real, and I hear you. I hear the message, and yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry you lost your friend.
I appreciate it. It's been more than one, believe me. The list is too long to go through, but it's been a lot.
Yeah, it yeah, just reach out, talk to people. That's part of the reason why I started my coffee company, is for that reason. Sit down and talk,
Yeah.
right? And just have an authentic conversation with people so they'll listen, uh, be human again, pull connections together, right? And yeah, that's rad. I think that's an awesome message. Hey man, we're super excited you're here. Thanks for joining us. We can't wait to get into question number 2 out of question number 5 on the next episode. So for those of you that are listening in, I know you can't wait to hear the content. I can't, and we're gonna make it. We're gonna go live with it and get to it. And I don't even know what it's gonna be. It's gonna be epic. So Jonathan, thanks for being with us, and we look forward to question number 2 out of
Thank
5.
you.
Thanks everybody. Thanks for tuning in to Leaders Lead. Have a great night.